Hey, my name is Joe. I work in the button factory.
Everyone good to get started? Got a bit of a breather. We were actually chatting about, so where do you think fellows are right now? And then one of our friends, he was like, they're all just looking to get back to Pune right now. They're looking to get out of institute. So we're very aware that we're probably the last thing standing between all of you and the weekend. And it's been many long weekends. We can completely empathize. At the same time, it's also the culmination of a very special, meaningful journey at Institute. I think right now, y'all are probably processing, there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of things buzzing around in your head. But something that almost every single alum I've ever spoken to, Institute is always a very special thing. So I would say, like, make the most of your last few days, this last week. Those connections that you have with people, really give that time, give yourself time to process everything, and don't be too nervous about what's next. And we're actually going to talk a lot about some of these things. So I'll quickly introduce myself. So my name is Arhan. I work on the alumni team at Teach of India, and today we're going to give you all an opportunity. I know over some of the previous Saturdays you'll have met different people working in different puzzle pieces, right? So all of you are familiar with the puzzle piece, the puzzle of EdEquity. So today is the final kind of culmination of that, where we have people who have worked in several of these puzzle pieces, who have found their piece in various ways and are still searching. But the main objective is to give you all an opportunity to just zoom out from the trees. You'll have been in those trees for 4 weeks. An opportunity to zoom out, look at what the forest looks like, right? And so the metaphor that I like to use, and you might have seen this, is the swimming pool in the ocean. The fellowship is about learning how to swim, and the swimming pool is a place where you know how to do that. Institute is really like your baby pool, where you have a lot of support, a lot of people around you, a lot of friends, and you have a lot of lifeguards basically looking out for you. But the real swimming pool, the deep end, is when it starts, probably 2 weeks from now. And you'll learn how to swim, but the whole point of this swimming is not to continue swimming in the swimming pool. It's really to get ready for the ocean and all the currents and the waves and the fish and all that. So that's the metaphor that's helpful. Like, we're preparing to learn how to swim in the ocean. So that's one objective, to help you just zoom out, see what that ocean of the alumni movement looks like. The second one is, as you're right now at summer school, you're probably seeing a very kind of narrow perspective of a child's life. And when we say these puzzle pieces, like, the fact is we need so many different factors to start coming together for children to truly attain that excellent education that we talk about. So this is an opportunity for all of you to actually interact with people who have worked in these puzzle pieces and are working in several different kinds of puzzle pieces together. So that's the second objective, to help you understand what this puzzle piece business really is through their kind of stories and people. And the third is, like, how is this fellowship actually going to help you? And how will it, each of you in your mind might have some place where you want to go beyond the 2 years. Many of you don't have that destination in your mind, which is absolutely fine. Most of us were in that same place. So it's an opportunity for you to understand that aspect as well. Like, so how will the fellowship help me get to where I want to be? And both in terms of, like, things like careers, but also in terms of who am I as a person, and so my leadership journey, as we call it, like, where will it help you? So those are the three major kinds of objectives that we're looking at, and it's a real privilege for me to be here with these four gentlemen who I've known now over many years. And I was just, like, on YouTube, you have those tags that you can just tag behind. So I tried to do a tagging, and some of the tags that came out, 2009, 2011, 2013, those are the cohorts, and 2010. The cohorts that are represented. Entrepreneur is a tag that just sticks out across many people here. So any like aspiring entrepreneurs in the room? Wonderful. So you're in very good company right now. Another tag is just school leadership, teacher training, teaching, educational technology, politics, community. All these tags are covered with this group here. They've all worked in right from the classroom all the way to a state government. So that's the scope of, again, this group. And what's really interesting is it's not just the Teach for India network that is common. There are several other kinds of networks that people here are a part of. And so that's also very interesting, because Teach for India is one network, but there is the Ashoka network, there's a tag here. There's the Acumen network, there is the IIM Bangalore network, there is the Aam Aadmi Party network here. and so that's the opportunity. Like, while y'all might think this is a session, it's really not a session. This is not a place where you'll get any kind of technical yarn or any such thing. It's more like a place where we can just have a good conversation. So we'll keep it very informal. That's why we didn't even want to sit on those chairs. Just wanted to be just with all of you. So the way it will work is we'll have two segments. Like the first part, we'll just start with a typical kind of panel discussion that you'll have seen. But the second part, we're going to give you an opportunity to just spend more time with each of them. So each panelist will share like one topic or theme that they're really passionate about, but they think is really relevant for all of you. And then you can just choose which topic or theme you want to chat more about. The question we'll just start with for everyone is, everyone here was on that side a few years back, and now they're, been in different organizations, worked in different places, been in grad school. What are one or two like milestones or turning points when you think back to the last few years, the fellowship? What are some milestones or turning points that stand out that played a big role in you being where you are right now? Okay, so yeah, I think focusing on the fellowship might be helpful, but even if it's something beyond the fellowship that you think is relevant, feel free to share it. But for now, we can focus on some turning points in the fellowship that led to you being where you are.
Hi, I'm Ullas. I'm a 2011 Pune alum of fellow. I taught grade 2 and grade 8 in Pune, and prior to the fellowship I was working with Infosys. Post the fellowship I was working with Google, and post that I joined as the first employee of Meghshala. And Meghshala is an education and technology non-profit where we use technology to help teachers in government schools to teach better. So we give them great lessons, we give them even more better technology as well as mentorship and guidance so that they can teach really well in the classroom. So that's what I've been doing for the last 3+ years. We've grown sort of exponentially in the last few months, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys.
Hi, my name is Siman. I think the way Arhan sort of put it in terms of like milestones, the story essentially and what I'm doing right now is sort of connected to that, so I'll just take a minute to sort of debrief that. I think a huge part of my story essentially is the story of firsts. And this story of firsts essentially is something that you're living through right now. Probably you're some of the first teachers in your family. Maybe you're dealing with learners who are the first learners in their family. I come from a similar background. I was the first child in my family who did not study in a village, studied in a town. Actually, the first child in my family who studied in an English medium school. First child in the family, and when I say immediate as well extended family, who became an engineer, like Ullas. We didn't meet in Infosys, but yeah, both of us are Infosians. Again, the first child in my family actually who sort of created the example that there is actually something called as post-graduation, because nobody in my family had ever done a post-graduation, and that too sort of, as Arhan sort of shared, I completed at IIM Bangalore. And I think like the story itself isn't just mine, right? Of course, you could attribute a little bit of who I am and where I am, and at this point in time, to some of the hard work I have done. But a lot of it is just aspirations of my parents and the excruciatingly painful experience that they have sort of gone through to put me into places that I am at this point in time. And I think that's essentially the story of me at this point. That's the story of Miraki, the organization that I that's just founded. We are about a year old now in terms of operations. We're working in New Delhi. We simply work with parents of children who are first generation learners, and we are trying to help them help their children. At this stage, there are about 14 crore kids right now in the primary school education. according to UN, 60% of them will not sort of fulfill their innate potential in India itself. So the question that we deal with, or I am dealing with right now, and that's the story of me at this point in time, is just can we sort of help them fulfill that potential through their parents who haven't been to school themselves? Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Anurag. My story is actually quite similar to Seeman's. The first two decades of my life were quite contrasting. I had in my first decade a situation where if it rained, my house had more rain inside than outside. So we had to live through those times. The first decade of my life, we did not have access to toilets. We used to defecate in open. I can remember several nights in the first decade of my life when my parents were either unfed or half fed so that we could be fed. And my second decade, the next decade, because of several reasons and the great labor that my parents undertook, was quite opposite. Where I had access to a private school, where I had access to the resources that a middle class has. And the sort of first decade continued when I entered the school called Babul Ulum that I taught in as part of fellowship. When I met the students who in some sense similar and in multiple sense far worse off than what I was or what my family was. And the first decade experience, which sort of got alive again when I entered the fellowship and entered a community called Seelampur in Delhi, sort of helped me understand how the systems are breaking down at every single point in time and how those systems needed to be fixed and how we are failing in fixing them and how system design could be so intimidating to the very people it seeks to serve. Those were the few understandings that I developed during the fellowship that have proven turning points or have defined in some ways the work that I do or undertake. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gaurav. I think about 9 years ago I was sitting, I don't know if this room was built at that time, but somewhere around, I think those steps were where we used to do our leadership forums a lot. So I basically dated myself as soon as I started. I joined the fellowship, I was lucky to join the fellowship in the first batch. Post the fellowship, I started an organization called 321. And we were passionate about helping the teachers of this country get the skills, the knowledge, and more importantly, the prestige they deserve to become the nation builders that they are and that they want to be. Sort of going to what Arhan said as a story, I have a couple, maybe I'll share the first one, we can see if we have time for a second. It was first year. It was first year of TFI, first year of everything, right? So the things were still getting put in place. So I was actually going to teach in Pune. We had an estimate of there were going to be about 27 children in the class I was going to teach. I reached there are about 51. So there's a little off from what I had in my mind. And for some reason, it was second grade. The youngest child was about 6 and the oldest child was about 14. And so there was a wide range there. And the first few months were very, very rocky. And it was basically, it was a hard class and it was a hard situation in many, many ways. But what I found was that I very easily sank into a very comfortable pool of self-pity. Right? It was, oh, I have so many kids, you have only so few kids, that's why I can't do this in my class. Oh, I have a private school but there's no roof, you have better infrastructure. Oh, you don't work on Saturdays, we work on Saturdays also, our days are longer. And basically, this whole thing of being comfortable with the difficulty of the situation and using that as an excuse. And one of the turning points that happened for me was, I basically got sick and tired of the self-pity and making excuses for the kids and for myself. I was like, you know what, this is what it is, right? We have so many kids, there's a whole different age range. I don't know what differentiation is, but I need to figure it out, we need to figure out planning, we need to do all of these things. And the unbelievable thing was just how much the classroom changed then in terms of what I did, in terms of what the children learned and how the classroom ended. When I look back, and that was really a sort of foundational experience for me, is that it showed that the realities are there, the problems are very hard, but a lot of it can change depending on how we think about that situation. And that sort of stayed with me throughout these sort of 9-10 years now, is that there is never any piece that you pick is not going to be easy. I'm pretty sure you guys are aware of that, right? But what will make the journey worthwhile and what will make the journey almost something that we can do is just how we think about that. And that lesson really came in the first 2-3 months of when I just saw how I was thinking, what I was doing, and then what the children were doing dramatically change, just on the basis of, I was like, okay, enough, this is bad, I need to think, what will I do about it?
Just when Gaurav spoke about how he felt during the first few months, I think it was a very similar experience. I think I remember the first few weeks was so draining that all I'd do in class was play videos and go home because my kids weren't ready to learn. I'd plan a really good RC lesson, I'd plan an even more better math lesson, I'd go in there and start teaching, while one kid would just get up and run across the room, pull somebody's hair and come back. And I was like, what do I do? Right? I mean, this was my first week in school. But I think what I want to share, something that sort of stuck with me and I sort of repeat the story everywhere I go, is what happened in my first day of school, right? So I go into school, I was at Infosys before, so my principal knew that I was at Infosys. So he introduces me to everyone saying, Infosys se aaye hain, bade log hain, aapke saath kaam karte hain, all of that. And I was like, I'm just another fellow. You guys have more experience than me, all of that. And then there were some 50 students sitting in one class. This was the TFI had entered that school for the first time that year. There were no fellows. The same thing happened, later on. But I entered, my co-teacher wasn't there with me. He came in the second institute. So I go in there, 50 kids sitting in the class, and the principal comes in and says, "वो 6 बच्चे हैं ना, वो आपके बच्चे हैं." So I go there, second standard kids. I go say hi, hello. I'm like, hi. This is institute. Huh? How many of you force your kids to speak in English? All of you. Great. So I go there. I'm like, hi. My name is Ullas. What is your name?
My name is Joe.
Oh, by the way, my current boss's name is Joe, and we do this for her. But I go there, hi, my name is Ullas, what is your name? And this one kid is like, hi, my name is Anurag. And I'm like, wow, so, my class knows English. I was so excited. I'm like, they know it, I can be a great teacher this year. And then I asked a couple of more kids, and then there was the girl sitting at the back. And I asked her, what's her name? And she's like, like, no, what is your name? That's it. I'm like, no, Ullas, Anurag, what is your name? And she's like, doesn't speak anything beyond that, just smiling in class. And I'm like, sense of possibility came back, something else came back. I'm like, shit, I shouldn't give up. I can't speak to her in Hindi, I have to speak to her only in English. Hi, my name is Ullas, his name is Anurag, what is your name? Still no answer, but somebody else answered. Anurag shot up and he says, Bhaiya, she is Muslim, she know English. That was my first day in school. I had never ever experienced this before. So I studied in a Muslim school myself while growing up, but this was for the first time that a second standard kid actually got up and said, Bhaiya, she Muslim, no English. That was the class that I had. And sort of what I realized over the course of the year in my school was, it was a lot of just people in the school perpetuating a lot of those things, and parents and communities and all these people perpetuating it, and it was not really Anurag, but it was Anurag's system that was perpetuating it. And that is something that we try to fight even through some of our lessons at Misha. So that's how the fellowship has helped me.
So I think one of the things that I value most in Teach for India is just community, is that people who have very different backgrounds are brought into a same place. Like the childhood that Anurag and Seemant were talking about was very different than the childhood that I had. And yet here we are, like working, connected by something that's shared. We've started talking about just those first few months. And so, Seemant and Anurag, if you could go back to what those first few months were like, and how you sustained the energy, the motivation to keep carrying on.
I think couple of things that sort of stand out, at least for me, during the first 3 months. So very similar experience to us, and I think it's sort of a revision for us as to what we were taught at institute and how we sort of, basically mimicked all of that when we went to classrooms. Is that right? Right. Yeah, English all the time. That was the first rule. Never ask the children whether they wanted to speak or not, but like that was the first rule for sure. I think my experience is essentially the way the first 3 months were. There were two things that shaped my entire first year. One was just my relationship with my principal. I think for the entire 1 year, he basically would call me at about 10:15 during lunchtime. And he would say, so Seemant sir, I think you should probably move out of the school. Like, that's nice, good motivation to sort of come back to every day. That's one thing, and I can go back to sort of why that happened. But the second thing I think was just something that framed my entire sort of thought process, and that sort of continues to stay right now, is that every single child that's in their classroom needs to sort of achieve, at least has to have some sort of achievement in the classroom. And I think I go back to the example of these two girls called Nikita and Rosie. I think they were probably their height was, they were very short, they were probably at my waist, like that height. And I would go into the classroom, and the first thing I wanted to say was, right, we've done our BOIs. I think my class was around 9 or 10%. In terms of reading level, I think they were around 0.0 or 0.1. And I was thinking, right, mid-year, they are going to be at 1, maths is going to be at 70, this is how we're going to go. And I think with specifically Rosie and Nikita, they were like, yeah, right, let's do this. And for 3 months I struggled, like the scores they didn't improve at all. I was completely blind in terms of thinking about academic achievement needs to sort of just be at that level. So I would have extra classes, 2-3 hours even beyond the school times. Parents hated me. बच्चे को lunch कब मिलेगा? School hated me. Right? बच्चे को रास्ते पे घर जाते आते कुछ हो गया, कोई उठा के ले गया तो all of that situation, I was sort of, again, single-mindedness was academic achievement, right? So with Nikita and Rosie, I said, right, so this is not improving. 3 months down the line, there's no improvement. With other kids, there was something. So I said, all right, maybe now I need to focus on these two kids in my extra sort of time as well. So I sat down with them for like a month before the mid-year. Are you guys aware of the concept of mid-year? दिवाली ब्रेक के आसपास and I was like ठीक है एक महीना इनके साथ मेहनत करेंगे पूरी मेहनत की right. And one thing I had sort of valued was like how much improvement you made rather than how much absolute score that you've sort of gotten. So kids who would get 95 would not be, so I mean they were doing well, but as a rule in our class you're like okay fine, you've improved by like 6%, but like look at this child who's improved by 40% in terms of the score previously, right? So funny thing, some sort of transformation happened. I don't know whether it was my hard work or sort of Nikita and sort of Rosie said कि यार अगर हमने नहीं किया तो ये छोड़ेगा नहीं हमें. पता नहीं शायद यही हुआ. But eventually they sort of scored really well. They scored around 60%. I think from 5 to 60 jump हुआ एक और एक 12 to 55. And I was like right, this is great. So we go to the class and I'm like right, आज तो discuss करेंगे results. थोड़ा everyone sort of scoring well, average बहुत अच्छा था and all those things. And I'm like so guys, we've done decently well. We are scoring around 65%, 68% as an average for maths. We are doing really well. But I want to facilitate two kids. So like, oh, Nikita, Rosie, can you stand up? And they were like, they were, I think, just afraid. Ki aaj matlab bula ke he's gonna say something that is not going to be sort of cool with the rest of the kids. They stand up and I'm like, right guys. So remember the rule of like sort of improvement, percentage change, and I said like Nikita sort of has improved by about 55% and Rosie has improved by about 43%, which is like which was way beyond that anyone had actually done in the class. I was like, right. So now what do we do? So there was this clapping that started, कि वाह वाह, you know, ये तो कमाल ही हो गया. Then Nikita and Rosie are sort of these bunch of achievers now in the class. And I was thinking, like that's how it played out in my head. I was like, oh, clapping hogi, they'll feel good, they'll feel motivated, and then we'll get back to our sort of work. As soon as the clapping started, first Nikita started crying, और उसके बाद Rosie started crying. I think वो domino effect होता है ना, मतलब एक शुरू हुआ तो दूसरा करेगा या बैंड वैगन इफेक्ट कह लो. मैं कह लो, ये तो मतलब situation ही पूरी बदल गई. And at this point in time, I have no idea how to sort of figure the situation out. Right? Like they are crying in front and they are sobbing. They are like the only till that point, the one thing that I learned was कि अगर कुछ नहीं पता चलता तो at least class के बाहर ले लो और कुछ नहीं कर सकते तो class के बाहर ले जाओ. Like Nikita, Rosie, come. Let's sort of walk out of the class. बच्चों को अच्छा किताब पढ़ लो, डायरी पढ़ लो, जो भी है मतलब you know those kind of things. प्रोग्राम मैनेजर आ रहा है तो किताबें पढ़ लो. And I'm like standing there, I'm like, क्या हुआ Nikita? Like what's happened? And she's like not speaking, but she eventually said, and she said, आज तक किसी ने ऐसा बोला ही नहीं. And it dawned on me that for Nikita and Rosie, they are 7-8-year-old kids who maybe for the first time in their lives were actually being congratulated or even being admired for doing something in the class. And I was like, right, इसके लिए तो मैंने plan नहीं किया आज. But that sort of, I think, shaped the entire experience that I had for the next 2 years. And the question then from thinking about, you know, pushing for this academic achievement, which of course one must, it changed to figuring out where is this child, right? Not just academically, in situation, in life, where is this child? And how can I sort of figure out ways to cater to where that child is? How can I figure out ways to reach out to that child? How can I figure out ways to sort of get him to max or her to maximize their potential? I think that story is definitely something that sort of shaped my entire teacher experience.
So we work with teachers where across different schools we go, we train them, and then we go give them feedback, coach them. When we first started doing that, one consistent experience that we had was we would go into a teacher's classroom, we'd see what they were doing, and then we would give them feedback. We'd start by all the things that they were doing well. Now these teachers are anything from first year teachers to teachers who've been teaching for 20, 25 years, so you know, the average teaching tenure is about 10, 15 years, right? So we used to sit in front of these teachers and we'd start by saying, man, you've done this well, so you've done this well, or this thing, right? And as we start going through the positives, you start seeing the tears coming out. And then you're like, pretty much like how you're saying, you're sitting there like, wait, what is happening? And they literally go, I've been doing this for 20 years, and nobody has ever said anything positive to me. And for us, that's where it comes from. If the teacher is not feeling that, how on earth will they create that for the students? And it just keeps perpetuating, right? So everyone, I don't know what the song was, right? But everybody needs a little bit of love in some ways, right? Like that whole thing that he was talking about, right? Like, and that epiphany dawns on all of us is that it's just a system that is almost not caring for anyone. And that's why everyone feels so uncared for, disrespected, not valued. And it just perpetuates. And it was funny that, like, it's the same thing if it's a 7-year-old child, or it's the same thing if it's a 55-year-old teacher.
Exactly what Gaurav said, right? So, like, how many of, like, I'm assuming your PMs do a good job. So, how many of them leave notes for you in classes? Try doing this with the teachers that you go to when you reach school. The reactions will be very, very, very different. When some of our program managers go into these government schools and leave a very small note, you know, we have a nicely made Mekshala card on which they write really well done, you know, this was really nice in your class, etc. This was given to a government teacher somewhere who spoke about this to a friend who spoke about this to another friend, to another friend, to another friend, which finally reached my mother. And my mother was like, "You guys gave some certificates in schools?" I'm like, "No," but it reached so far that they were so excited and happy just to receive a small card. So try these things out in your class.
You know, one of the biggest influence on me is my class 9 social science teacher, Mrs. Usha Bhardwaj. So what interestingly she used to do was, they used to do monthly tests in my school, which was a 20 marks test basically. जो उस महीने पढ़ाया वो बता दो कि कितना आपने रट लिया और कितना अच्छे से उसको लिख सकते हैं. So interestingly what she used to do was, even if I have scored a 5 out of 20, she would not write 5 out of 20 or poor or you haven't done well or bad smiley or anything. Her presentation of marks used to be 15 more to go, which suddenly changes the perspective and the way student feels that. And I remember getting a 0, which never was reflected as a 0, which was reflected as 20 more to go. And I remember how I felt, how I dreaded receiving the paper, because I knew I would get a 0 because I haven't done anything. But I didn't get a 0, I got 20 more to go. And that was one of the feelings that has stayed with me. But fast forward to the fellowship. You know, by and large in this room, we are upper class Hindu, which gives us the privileges unimaginable in this country. And we often get lost in our privileges so much that मैंने इतना सेक्रीफाइस किया है, मैं 2 घंटे ट्रैवल करके आता हूँ, मैं इतनी मेहनत कर रहा हूँ, ये बच्चे कुछ नहीं कर रहे, टीचर नहीं पढ़ा रही है, प्रिंसिपल चिल्लाता रहता है. We often get lost in all of that. And what we fail to identify is a story behind these people. For example, the story of one of my students called Nazreen, who used to show up late for half an hour every day, despite being, you know, literally pleaded, समझाया, डांट मार दिया, अब तो जो करना है कर दिया, फिर भी she shows up half an hour late, only to find, you know, extremely embarrassing story behind that she wakes up at 5 a.m., does entire household chores, gets both of her younger brother and sisters ready, makes the breakfast for the house, and then finally runs to the school, which is why she gets half an hour late. Just the stories behind the teacher or the principal or the students, which becomes an infinite source of inspiration. So sometimes we do need to cut through the bullshit of ourselves and bullshit of the others in order to really get down to the point. The other, you know, one of the greatest source of inspiration for me in my fellowship was the fact that I taught in a madrasa-affiliated school. So it was an all-Muslim school and I am a Hindu. And the fact that our Maulvi Sahab was so progressive that we used to celebrate Diwali with as vigor as Eid. And that my Maulvi once shouted at me that why are you not giving preference to the girls for education? Why are you not admitting the girls? And when the other day the Maulvi came and literally screamed कि computer पे class नहीं होती, मुझे आके बताया parents ने, computer class काहे नहीं कराते हो तुम? So these are stories and these are the people that I had drawn great inspiration from during the course of fellowship. And one of course was, I'm sure each one of us has used at some point in time or maybe do regularly use जो क्या बोलते हैं उसको जो पैडल करके रिक्शा ले जाते हैं और क्या नाम है साइकिल रिक्शा सबने यूज किया होगा मतलब चलाने के लिए नहीं बैठने के लिए सबने किया होगा आई एम अज्यूमिंग nobody drove it because we come from a sense of privilege we never have had to do it and that's another story why we've never had to do it but what often surprises and amazes me is कि जो आदमी आगे बैठ के चला रहा होता है ना हमारा बोझ ढोरा होता है कई बार हम जब 2 और 3 उस पर लटक लेते हैं और फिर 10 रुपए के लिए 40 और 50 उस पर लड़ लेते हैं जो उसकी कभी उसको ध्यान से देखना उसका पेट अंदर सिकुड़ा होता है और उसकी अंतड़ियां लगभग बाहर आ रही होती हैं एंड मेरे उसमें बहुत ज़्यादा अंतर नहीं है सिवाय एक एजुकेशन एक फैंसी फार्स एजुकेशन डिग्री लेने का और कोई खास अंतर नहीं है एंड दैट is nearly a sure destiny of our students if we fail to do our best on any given day. And that thought should scare and inspire us.
You all spent the last night, I think several of you spent it in the communities. Am I right? And so probably that was one of the first experiences you'll have had of seeing the environment that students are in, the children are in, families, and as Anurag was saying, there's a story behind everyone. So I think it makes sense to have some of you just call out. Like, what was some of the feelings that you had? Anything that you want to share out? Because what I'd like for them to talk about is just engagements with families, with parents, with students outside of the classroom, which becomes an extremely important part of everything that happens inside the classroom. So any particular instances or stories where you engage with communities and there was a moment of like real realization of some kind that helped you in the classroom in some way?
I had a friend called Rajendra. He now works with Save the Children in Mumbai. So those of you in Mumbai, please do find time to meet him. So his house was right behind mine. And in his room was a poster which served a great reminder for us for 2 years. It said, you can either do a fellowship or do a clownship. The choice is yours. So that was a great mantra for us. Ultimately, the onus is on us. And it is what we make of it.
Yesterday when we went to their place, they were in their own, safe space like we call it. So the guy who is completely quiet in my class was the most mischievous. They stay together, in the same building. And the guy who was like the dawn of my class, who always distracts, he was a little scared there because he was scared of his father, he was scared of his mother. He would listen to them because they scold him, So that's the difference, because maybe he's not able to speak in his own house, or he's been dominated by his own family members. That is why he comes to the class, he's expressing it in his, the kind of distraction that he creates for others. So that's his way of expression, that either pay I'm not able to, but either I will.
Your classroom is a safe space, or should be a safe space for children. I think many a times when they're outside of your class, it might not be the safest space for them. There's sexual violence, there is just violence, there is everything else that happens outside of your class, and you should, as much as possible, ensure that your classroom becomes a safe space, and you can be that person that your kids can come and speak to. So I think that's one thing. But I think a larger reflection is when you guys go back to your schools and look at some of your other fellow teachers, not TFI fellows, but your other colleagues in school, and when you begin to poke fingers at everything that they do and say, she hits the kids in the class, she does this, she doesn't plan for her class well enough, she doesn't do that, she doesn't do this. What I sort of remember is, just going back to her reflection, all these teachers stay in those communities, and for them it's okay to hit, and for them it's okay that they do something with another kid, because it's okay in their community, it's okay in their culture to be doing that. And we are nobody to just go in there as outsiders and say, that's wrong, you cannot do it. I think there has to be that sense of empathy that comes in and you talk them out of it, versus just pointing fingers at people and saying you're wrong. I don't think, as soon as you walk out of this place, nothing is black and white. Everything is grey. And it's only when you begin to understand how to figure that grey out is when you learn a lot more in your fellowship. Otherwise, all you'll be doing is just complaining, and that's not the best way to. And you'll probably make it a clownship and not a fellowship.
Before I start, I just have a couple of questions. I would love it if you guys could just raise your hands if you sort of do this or sort of demonstrate this behavior. How many of you have like a small group that you sort of stick to in the institute itself? But just a small group that you stick to. Right. Please put your hand up. How many of you look at your program manager or towards a staff member as the other? मतलब ये प्रोग्राम मैनेजर है.
And we can switch off the cameras.
We don't need to, that's fine. It's a safe space. Please, how many of you look at your program manager or staff members as the other, not like the same? Or you treat them differently than you would treat your close co-three people? Right. Thank you. The point here being, the definition of community starts from you. It doesn't come from me, it won't come from Adhan, none of us here. Right? It starts from you. So whatever is it that you're thinking that the community should be doing, well, the first question is, are we sort of demonstrating and doing that here? Right? So do not look at, and I think one of the themes that's sort of coming out here is that, yes, we come from a privileged background. Yes, we do, like, that's fine. There's no point of being ashamed here. We do, right? The point is being cognizant of the fact that हाँ ऐसा है. और इससे कोई पंगा नहीं है actually. I tell you a quick couple of stories, just which have shaped my sort of thought process around communities. So I was on this Bharat Yatra, inspired by our great Gandhiji, where I visited some sort of, the most sort of backward districts in the country, districts which had low HDI indexes. And I was in this place called Jhabua. किसी ने सुना? अरे वाह, आपसे बात करूँगा मैं. Jhabua in Madhya Pradesh, it's at the border of Gujarat, right? And so I'm from Punjab, by the way, and the definition of a farm or a farmer farm and khet are the same, right? I'm assuming. थोड़ी English कमजोर है मेरी, माफ करिएगा. Is very different in Punjab than in most of the central part of India as well. So here in Jhabua, I'm looking at like this expanse, like जहाँ तक मेरी नज़र जा रही है बिल्कुल बंजर है. It's brown. There's no मतलब एक कण भी नहीं है जो कोई ग्रेन्स हो किसी तरह के या कुछ खेती किसी तरह की हो, कुछ नहीं है. I'm just like in my head I'm thinking, where is this? What is this place? I have never been to this place, of course, but I don't even understand what this is. Essentially what I was looking at is I was looking at how do people specifically in areas which are not sort of served by the government directly. So in Jhabua essentially there are sparse populations spread across like miles. So you would go like 5 miles and there'll be 5 houses, then you further go 10 miles, there'll be 3 houses. So ऐसे spread है लोगों का essentially. In one of the places I went, I met this person who essentially, I was being this outsider who was sort of trying to figure out how to live, how do they sustain. I was asking them question as to क्या चल रहा है. Bigger issue was of course irrigation, पानी नहीं है, rainfall नहीं हुई थी. The crop that they was actually growing wasn't the crop that was suitable for the soil that they were growing in. All those issues, but primarily we came to अच्छा school चलता है क्या? Because stop question. And then he was like, oh हाँ, teacher आता है. And like अच्छा. So specifically, I was talking to this one person, and I was like, अच्छा आपका बच्चा फिर कौन सी क्लास में? तो 2 बच्चे हैं, एक पहली में जाता है और तीसरी में जाता है. एक ही क्लास है, right? तो single class schools. There are about 98,000 or 1 lakh schools in India. They are single classroom schools. I'm like, right, nice. मैं like अच्छा क्या पढ़ रहे हो बच्चे से पूछा. अच्छा मैं तो गया ही नहीं बड़े दिन से. कितने दिन से गए? 7 दिन से. मैं कहा अरे कैसे? तो 7 दिन से सेंचुरी के पास पानी नहीं था. They had 4 buckets of water, which they had to use for not just bathing, for like cleaning their utensils, for washing their clothes, right? And this child was not going to school. Why? Because he was smelling. अब बर्तन साफ करें, कपड़े धोएं, कि एक्चुअली बच्चों को नहलाएं और वो स्कूल जाए. तो वो कह रहा था कि यार, if I go to school, I'll smell. The rest of the kids will make fun of me. How could I go? This small example, I'll come back to this example, but then इसी से connected, I was thinking, water is such a big issue. Education जो बाद में आता है, पहले पानी की जरूरत तो पूरी हो जाएगी. So I asked this really intelligent, I think 70-year-old person, जिनको मेरी भाषा और मेरे को उनकी भाषा समझ आती है, because this is tribal area also, right? And I'm like, अच्छा, sir, like, what's the price of water here? Because again, stop question. कुछ deep पूछ लो. And then he's like, he says something, and I'm like, sir, ये क्या बोला इन्होंने? And he comes back to me and he says, वो पूछ रहे हैं कि आपकी टी-शर्ट का प्राइस क्या है? मैं कहा यार ये क्या मतलब हुआ इसका, लाइक आई एम आस्किंग यू व्हाट्स द प्राइस ऑफ वाटर, व्हाई यू आस्किंग मी टी-शर्ट का प्राइस. तो बेसिकली व्हाट अ पॉइंट ही वाज ट्राइंग टू मेक वाज कि यार आप क्या कर लोगे इसका. मतलब ठीक है जानकारी मिली 10 रुपए लीटर मिलता है, फिर क्या, राइट. तो यार वो जो हॉर्नेट नेस्ट होता है या फिर वो जो अभी उल्लास कहते हैं ना, कुछ ऐसी चीज़ें, डोंट गेट इनटू थिंग्स जस्ट फॉर द फन ऑफ इट बिकॉज यू आर क्यूरियस. When you look at communities, it's a complex thing, right? This community itself, like all of us are in communities, although again we are representing some sort of hierarchy, we are separate from you, looking at you and everyone is looking at us, but I'm saying this is still a community. How are we figuring our way out here will sort of manifest itself and how you work with communities outside. So start with the definition of what is community to me here and then sort of start out. Know what your boundaries and limitations are. I think the biggest learning again for me through these experiences, multiple of them, has been, do I know my boundaries? What is it that I get into? For example, we are working with right now women specifically on financial literacy. So one of them that has an issue that the money that I earn goes to my, do you know what a JATE is? Elder brother-in-law. They're like, so I was like, how do you save for your child? वो तो वही देख लेते हैं, वो कहते हैं हो जाएगा. Now I have two options. If I look at, sorry, I'm just pointing this point now. What is my boundary? I have two options. Either say, ऐसे कैसे? आप तो 2000 रुपये सेट कर रखो अपने बच्चे की पढ़ाई के लिए, और ऐसे फिर क्या कर सकते हैं? Right? Both these questions in themselves represent two very different sort of thought processes and how you approach this concept. Sorry for this to be long examples, but essentially 2 points. The definition starts from you. Everyone around you is community, including the parents that you will work with. Second is define those boundaries on what is it exactly that you can do and sort of stay for a longer duration of time rather than just doing a touristy kind of a visit on these issues.
3 quick points. Now, building on the definition of community, so we have, especially since I come from engineering background, that is what engineers excel at. We complicate something to an extent that we can say, oh, it's too complicated, we can't do it. So that is at least one area of excellence of engineers, for sure. But so ये fancy terms community क्या है? मतलब भाड़ में जाए community से. मेरे सामने एक बच्चा है, वो बच्चे को मेरे को पढ़ाना है. वो बच्चे को समस्या क्या है? वो सुबह खाना खा के नहीं आ रहा, तो हो सकता है उसे घर में राशन ना आता हो. अच्छा, वो स्मेल कर रहा है, शायद पानी ना आता हो. अच्छा, हो सकता है घर में वायलेंस हो किसी प्रकार का, चाहे सेक्सुअल, चाहे फिजिकल, चाहे मेंटल अब्यूज हो. तो सिर्फ उस बच्चे को देखें और उसकी एक्चुअली बीनीथ द सरफेस जाकर समझने की कोशिश करें, और जब वो समस्या को समझें, उस समस्या में जो खुद समस्या है और जहां से सॉल्यूशन आ सकता है, और उन्हीं से आएगा, आपसे नहीं आएगा, तो गलत मत रहना. तो जहां से सॉल्यूशन आ सकता है, समाधान आ सकता है, उसको कह देते हैं कम्युनिटी. वो हो सकता है स्कूल के बगल का दुकानदार हो जो शायद आपकी निकलती बच्चे को छेड़ता हो, चाहे थानेदार हो, चाहे माँ बाप हो, चाहे जेठ हो, चाहे कोई और हो, उसको कहते हैं कम्युनिटी. कोई बहुत फैंसी डेफिनेशन नहीं कि कम्युनिटी मीन्स एक बड़ा ही गरीबी में रहने वाला एक समुदाय है जिसके मतलब आंसू आ जाए एक बार देखते ही, सोचते ही. वो बड़ा ही रोमांटिसाइज्ड और यूजलेस डेफिनेशन ऑफ कम्युनिटी. एक तो वो. दूसरा, किस प्रकार से एंगेज करते हैं, जो बहुत मेरी लिमिटेड ऑब्जर्वेशन रही है पिछले कुछ सालों में और जिसमें मैं खुद परपेट्रेटर रहा हूँ, वो ये है कि ये मोटे तौर पे वन वे रिलेशनशिप होता है, वन वे कम्युनिकेशन होता है, जहाँ सारा ज्ञान अर्जित मैंने कर लिया है और मैं हूँ ज्ञानी, परम ज्ञानी हूँ मैं, और आप मूर्ख, आपको बच्चे पालने नहीं आते, आपको बच्चे नहलाने नहीं आते, बच्चे पढ़ाने नहीं आते, बच्चों से बात करनी नहीं आती, और आपको कुछ नहीं आता. अब मैं आपको ज्ञानी बनाऊंगा. तो आओ पेरेंट टीचर मीटिंग बताऊंगा कैसे बच्चे को पढ़ाते हैं, फिर अगली पेरेंट टीचर मीटिंग बताऊंगा बच्चे को कैसे खिलाते हैं, और फिर अगली पेरेंट में बच्चे पैदा कैसे करते हैं. तो ये ज्ञान का ना एक सागर से फूटता रहता है हर पेरेंट टीचर मीटिंग में, और ये बंद होना जरूरी है. थोड़ा कभी कभार गलती से ज्ञान अर्जित करना भी जरूरी है. और फिर सॉल्यूशन क्या निकलते हैं? सॉल्यूशन इस प्रकार के निकलते हैं कि हमें न्यूट्रिशन इंप्रूव करना है, बच्चों का बैलेंस डाइट क्योंकि चैप्टर है और उसको प्रैक्टिस में लेके आना है बैलेंस डाइट को. तो फिर मम्मियों का सेशन बुलाएंगे बैठा के और उसको भाषण देंगे, सोयाबीन में प्रोटीन है, दाल में प्रोटीन है, और कोई ये नहीं पूछेगा कि दाल के दाम उड़द की 140 रुपए किलो है, दे दो वो भी मुझे। दाल कह तो रहे मुझे दाल खिलाओ, बच्चे को दाल खिलाओ, 140 रुपए भी दे दो मुझे, वो तो 140 हो रखे हैं। तो एक सॉल्यूशन जिसका रियलिटी से कोई रिलेशनशिप नहीं है, तो फेलो भी खुश हो जाता है, मम्मी भी खुश हो जाती है, चलो कुछ अच्छा एंटरटेनमेंट हुआ 1 घंटा बाहर जाके, और निकल के कुछ नहीं आता है। इंस्टेड अगर प्रॉब्लम समझी होती तो शायद बैठ के सोयाबीन और दाल के दाम समझकर शायद एक लो कॉस्ट बैलेंस डाइट बनाई होती, ना कि भाषणबाजी की होती कि कौन से डाइट में कौन सा प्रोटीन होता है, विटामिन B12 किसमें होता है। अरे क्या करना है विटामिन B12 जानने का, उससे जिंदगी चलती बिना उसके भी। तो फिर सोल्यूशन ऐसे निकलते हैं। तो ये दूसरा है कि इसको ज्ञान के सागर को फूटने ना दे, थोड़ा सा आने दे उसको, और जिस समस्या को समझ ले तो वहीं से सॉल्यूशन निकल कर आएगा। तो ये दूसरा पॉइंट है। और उनको उस प्रोसेस में इक्वल पार्टनर बनाए, और वो आपके इक्वल पार्टनर हैं। अपने प्रिविलेज की को लेकर जो सीमांत का बहुत कॉग्निजेंट होना जरूरी है, वो इम्पोजिशन ना हो, क्योंकि इम्पोजिशन मसाला बटे तक टिकता नहीं है, किसी के ऊपर नहीं टिकता है, कुत्ते ऊपर नहीं टिकता है, आपके ऊपर नहीं टिकता है। एटलीस्ट ये सिमिलैरिटी है कुत्ते और हमें। और तीसरा ये याद रखें, और दिस इज एक्चुअली वन ऑफ फेवरेट कोट्स, दैट एनी सोशल प्रॉब्लम सीमिंगली सिंपल और डिफिकल्ट व्हेन लुक्ड मोर क्लोजली टर्न्ड आउट टू बी मिलियन टाइम्स मोर डिफिकल्ट। तो ये थोड़ा इसको समझे, कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी को, लोगों को जोड़ें और थोड़ा ज्ञान के सागर से दूर रहें।
Specifically on how you're viewing the community. ये ना जो specifically when you're looking at it from that problem solving mindset essentially, then that is already perpetuating that one way communication. फिर आपकी जो conversation is not really you're listening to it, right? You're just saying कि अच्छा मेरे को ये problem solve करनी है. That's why I have to establish a two-way communication. So in that framing itself, you're actually creating a one-way communication. It's not, doesn't need to be that functional. कि बच्चा पढ़ नहीं पा रहा है इसीलिए मेरे को इससे बात करनी है. It's then a very transactional relationship. So I'm saying the view here is a little different in terms of how you're looking at community. Yeah, one of the sort of questions that I would always sort of go back to when I got up in university, sort of had to, especially this observation for me was always ki, if I am sort of interacting with parents of the children I'm teaching, like, would this be okay if this was done with my mother or with my own family? Right? Would that transactional sort of setup be sort of, I'm sorry, I can't repeat the entire thing, but essentially the question that I was saying was, if this transaction that's happening, or if it is a transactional view with respect to how you're working with the community, one, I think I was saying that that's not, for me, like that's not a holistic view of sort of looking at community as well. So second thing I was saying was, when you're working with people who are a part of your community, and specifically if they are parents, then having a benchmark question for me it was, would it have been okay if a teacher in India fellow actually had that conversation with my parents about whatever the conversation I'm having with these parents? Those questions are sort of set with me.
I think a common point that at least I'm pulling out from hearing everyone speak is that try and understand first, right? Before going in with a judgment or an agenda or a solution, try and understand first. And I want to point out that's very, very hard. And it's not because you're evil people. It's not because you're people who've not checked their privilege or you think too much of yourself. This is hard for everyone. It is equally hard for the community that we're working with. Because human beings, by nature, are judgmental beings. Again, not because we are evil entities, it's a biological survival thing. Right? One of the things that I've found a lot of value in the last sort of 10 odd years is this whole field called behavioral psychology. Right? Many of you might be familiar with it, behavioral economics and everything that comes from it. One of the fathers of that field is this person called Daniel Kahneman, who wrote a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. Definitely must read it. He talks about a very simple concept, that there are two ways of thinking the human brain takes. System 1, system 2. One of these is your default. It's quick. It just goes, it basically just matching and judgment comes in. The other one is the analysis, is the understanding, is the thinking. Guess which one the brain prefers? First one. And it's not because the brain is evil. Thinking is expensive. Nature rewards energy conservation. You spend energy on things that's costly. The human brain is 2% of our body weight, 20% of our energy consumption. So nature has optimized us to use as less brain space as possible. That's why it overwhelmingly prefers that we look at something, make a quick judgment and act. Because for most of our time as a species, that was the most important skill. Because you have to figure out, is this thing going to eat me or not? Am I safe here? What can I do here? So that's programmed into all of us, right? So the moment we see some behavior, it's but natural that we're going to jump in there and judge, right? This meets my bar, doesn't meet my bar, this person matches, doesn't match this, right? That's okay. The worst thing will be is you first judge someone and then you feel bad and judge yourself and just keep going back in that cycle. What's helped me in the process is to just understand that that's how it is, and first bringing the awareness and then slowly transitioning into the point of, I need to understand. But remember, it's going to be hard, it's going to take time, and you'll have to use different processes. So what you'll have to develop, what I have tried to develop for myself, is pick up the flags. When someone says something, pop, a judgment comes. And you first start to make yourself aware of, okay, I judge this very quickly, I judge this very harshly, and then slowly try and see, okay, how can I interpret this in a different way? I think if there's anything to add, that's what I would add, is that it's very critical, but it's very hard. So don't be too harsh on yourself, but just sort of take yourself to the process of letting go of the judgment, even if it comes, because it will come, and then figuring out how you get to a place of understanding.
The question around if a child is being beaten, do we act, do we observe? And then there was the question around privilege. So again, opening it up, each of you can respond to whichever one.
There are few things in life which are matters of rights. Education being one, dignity being the second, life being the third, and there's a whole range of list that every individual is entitled to by the virtue of our birth. And the rights are not luxury or privileges. But then what is privilege, if not the rights? I was born a man. Now the way our society is structured immediately allowed me to escape from the prejudice that the entire society has against women. I did not earn the right to be a man. I don't know how does one earn the right to be a man. I don't know that. There is no formula for it. I did not sign up for it. There is no way. That's a privilege that I have. I must be cognizant of it, of how I use it. I can use it for good and I can use it to perpetuate the same prejudice. I was born in Hindu society. By the virtue of just born in a certain religion, the chances of me being pushed in poverty considerably reduce. I was not born in lower caste, and by the virtue of that, the chances of me facing several prejudices and several economic hardships, so social hardships, were taken away. None of these I earned. If I'm a straight, not a homosexual, I suddenly escape from the barrage of prejudices and the questions and the stares of the people. Now that's a privilege. Nobody earns these privileges. One is just simply born with them. And these are not the matter of rights. Nobody's right to be a man. So, and hence the distinction between the rights and the privileges. And this long list of privileges. Arhan has a degree from Harvard, so he's much more likely to be taken seriously than somebody from XYZ institute in the country, while that person may be far more brilliant than Arhan. But the very fact that institutional privilege is there matters. So that's about privilege. Can I go on? I just want to make one more comment about what do you do when you see something wrong happening, which is a question quite similar to what Shijoy also asked about ethical dilemmas. There are no easy answers to these questions. And I did not mean that in the very phrase that I used, ki gyan mat bato. What happens is, it becomes a one-way communication. It becomes a process of gyan bato only. And that is a problem. So when you see a situation like a child being beaten, of course, it is a moral responsibility to do something about it. But what that something is needs to be understood. And how one goes about it also needs to be understood. Now, those are not the hard or universal answers for these questions. Something must be done, that's a given.
So to your question of what is privilege, I personally don't get into the privilege concept a lot because it's a relative term. In any room that you are in, you are more privileged than some people and less privileged than some people. And I think the whole conversation on privilege started from a very fundamental kernel of truth, but has now become this concept of virtue signaling, right? So the fundamental truth where they started from is that we live, have lived, and will always live in an unequal society. There's a fact, it's been there, there's a high chance that it will be there. And that's a very important thing to understand. I think that's what a lot of people are talking about. That it is important to understand that those differences exist, and then you have to figure out how will you live and handle those differences. What unfortunately it's become is often that it's become a concept that excludes more people. I've never seen a privileged conversation where everyone comes out feeling part of one community. It's almost like you are bad people because you are privileged and you don't realize that. You are good people because you are not privileged and you are. It just becomes too much of tutu meme. Like this person looked down on this person looked down on this person, and sort of becomes glorification of who feels they're the least privileged and who can sort of. And so I personally stay away from that because I prefer concepts where we can include than exclude, right? And the whole point of the privilege conversation was to include. That's where it started from, that we come with different, like he was saying, right? Like we have different advantages when we're born, and that's a fact. Like it makes a difference if you are a man or a woman in terms of opportunities you get. That doesn't mean that you have to feel bad that you're a man. It doesn't mean that you have to give pity to everyone who's doesn't have the opportunity. It's just to understand that these things play a part in the lives that we lead, and how in your way can you just ease that path for everyone around you and build on that. So that's how I sort of understand and stay away from the slightly intense debates that it becomes. To the question that came on, what do you do, right? If you've seen a behavior that you don't agree with, what do you do? So I think again, that's a very important thing to think about, because you are going to be in that situation a lot. And how you handle that situation, especially in the first 2 months, is going to a large extent decide how your experience is going to be. With those teachers, with the principal, with the community, with the children. And the point to think about is, like they were sharing, that there's no right answer, but here's how I try and think about it. First of all, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Okay? So if a child is being hit in front of you, there are two problems there. One is, how do you make sure the child is physically safe in this moment? And the second is, how do you ensure this habit of beating a child stops over time? Here is the problem. If you try and solve for one, there is a chance you might not be able to solve for the other. And that's the call you have to take. So if you jump in there in that moment and tell that principal or that parent that you are wrong, you might be able to save the child in that moment. There is a chance though that you might not be able to build a relationship with that person and not be able to ever have that conversation and move them to a bigger thing. Which is what makes our work so hard, right? Is that you have to take that call, and that call is so hard because there's emotion surging. Right? We have 3 brains, by the way: reptilian, emotional, human. This is the youngest brain, prefrontal cortex, the first one that gets shut down when emotion comes. Like a good Indian hierarchical family, this is the youngest one, you shut up. This handles 2 things, by the way: reason and speech. That's why we lose them the moment a surge of emotion happens and you react to that. The point is, Is that the problem you're trying to solve? And if you figure out which problem you're trying to solve, what you'll realize, what a lot of people on this panel are saying, is the most effective strategy is to first understand. Why is this person beating the child, right? We work with a lot of teachers who hit. You know why majority of teachers hit? Because they're afraid. They're tired, they're scared, they can't control the class, their identity is in question, they're exhausted mentally, physically, and they want 10 seconds of peace. If we were put in those situations, we might react very similarly, right? The point is now you to understand that. But if you understand that, that gives you a massive opportunity. You're like, you want peace? I will get you peace. And I will get you not 10 seconds, I'll get you a whole lifetime of peace. And that's what we do. So we don't go in and judge teachers for what they're doing. We try and understand. We never use the word should. There is no you should not. It's just, here is a better way. And teachers go and try that, and they come back, they're like, oh my God, this works. Why did no one tell me? It's so much better, right? And so the assumption is that there is good in them. Our job is to maximize that, not point out the bad in them. And it's a much better strategy for behavior change. You know why? Because people can disagree with your opinion. They can't disagree with the success they are having. So when teachers are able to get children to learn without hitting them, they're like, this works. And that's our point. That's what we're trying to get them as quickly with as little bhashan or gyan as possible. So that would be the only thing, right? Just be aware of what is the problem. So the short term and the long term. And the pain will be that you might have to suffer some short term problems to get a chance to solve the long term one. And if you want to solve that, understanding is the starting point. There's a reason why the first step of design thinking is empathy.
So now there's a chance to actually break up into smaller groups and deep dive into some of the topics that they want to talk more about. So what I'm going to just request is, if each of you could just share that one topic that you're passionate about that you think is relevant.
I'm really passionate about technology and how we can actually use technology to make things better for not just in the classroom but even the entire system. So, if you guys want to chat about that, we can.
The topic that I'm going to sort of talk about is how can sort of parents and communities be equal participants in ensuring that the developmental outcomes of children sort of improve. So by that I mean academic or healthcare outcomes.
If two people could translate this sentence into Hindi quickly, I'm somebody who understands Hindi. The child is playing in the garden. Sir. बच्चा आंगन में कहीं खेल रहा है. Yes. Now one female. Yes. Somebody who understands Hindi. Yes, ma'am. The child is playing in the garden. बच्चा बगीचे में खेल रहा है. Why not बच्ची? I used a gender neutral term. You made it male. And whatever the sentence was, कि child is doing something with mehendi. What would your translation be? That's a sneak peek into the extent of prejudice we all suffer from, which is why I chose a male and a female. We all of us. But anyway, I would want to have an interaction around the role of government and how you can use your fellowship in developing a better understanding of how systems are designed.
So there are 4 things I'm very passionate about. First is, how do you make teaching the coolest profession? Right? You meet someone who's a teacher and you go, wow, you're a teacher. But I'm not going to talk about that. The second thing I'm very passionate about is technology, like Ullas. But I'm not going to talk about that. The third thing I'm very passionate about is how do you build amazing organizations? Organizations that magnify the spirit of people working, help them become the best they can be, with amazing cultures and amazing people. But I'm not going to talk about that. The thing I'm going to talk about is the fourth thing I'm very passionate about, is how do you sustain excellence? Because excellence is about, it's a habit, it's not a one-time thing. So how do you make sure that not only do you do things well, but you sustain them over a long period of time? And the reason I feel, I hope it'll be relevant for you, is because that was one of the hardest things for me during the fellowship, right? There was so much passion, there was so much josh, and I would go through this and then crash, this and crash, right? I was not consistent in many ways in my life, in my relationships, in my work. And one of the biggest things that we had to learn was, if you're serious about this, we're talking minimum 60, 70 years of work here for each of us individually. We will not survive 60, 70 years if we keep working the way we work. So we put a lot of focus as an organization individually of how do you sustain yourself. Like, what are the practices and habits you build now so you can do this 7, 8, 9, 10 years and people ask you, are you tired? Like, no, I'm fresh, I'm just getting started. So that's what, and hopefully that'll be relevant, because that was really relevant for me and I struggled with that at the fellowship. So how will you sustain yourself?
The one thing that was always running at the back of my mind was, what next? What next? What will I do for my internship? What will I do after the fellowship? What will I do? What should I do in my classroom right now so that it will help me later on? And these were some of the questions that always just kept going on in my head. In my flat, we were 4 other Teach for India fellows. I was the last one to get a job. Everybody else had a job and I didn't have it. And that pressure actually sort of kept going on in my head also. So the one thing that I've realized in the fellowship, and something that if I knew at the beginning I would have done much better, was, I think if you can do the job that you are supposed to do right now really, really well, the universe will take care of the rest. So if you given your best every single day to your kids, to your teachers, to the communities, you'll be sorted for life.
We're quite obsessed with what will I do post fellowship? Where will I get a job? What will I be able to do? Will I be able to get into a grad school of that kind with a scholarship and this kind of letter recommendation, etc. And in that range of questions, what definitely substantially gets hindered is my own ability to take risks for doing something that I genuinely believed in. And if we take that range of questions away and actually focus on solving a problem instead of, am I getting a grad school called HKS, or am I getting a 75,000 rupees post fellowship from 17,000 currently? If we take away those questions, I think that will help. Because there is no rain without thunder and lightning, so let's just live with that.
No written word, no spoken plea can tell our children what they ought to be. Nor all the books on all the shelves, it's what the teachers are themselves. Our children will become what we model in front of them. So every dream, every hope that you have for them, show it to them.
Your lives are going to change in ways that you probably will not even understand after you're done with the fellowship. It's going to change fundamentally. Trust me, you are not going to change their lives. Maybe that will happen, but definitely what will happen is that your lives are going to change. The only point that I would make is embrace it. Don't fight it, embrace that. The second thing that I would just say, and I think there were tough questions today, it was just, I think all of us had our sort of moments where we were like, how do we really sort of frame this, right, in a way that is helpful for you guys? I think one thing that if you have to sort of take away, and I think which I probably did maybe later on, is that every single answer is within you. So dive inside rather than externalize everything, right? So embrace the change that is going to happen once you get there, and then just trust yourself that you will figure out those answers during this process of fellowship.
The one thing that I would like to leave you all with, and that I always have to pinch myself because it's a very lucky thing, is that we're a part of this community. And there are about 100 people in this room. As you can see, the wisdom and the knowledge that exists within all of us is tremendously powerful. There are 2,000 plus alumni in all of our cities. They're all around us. There are people who are working in all of these different areas, who themselves have so much of wisdom, so much of knowledge. So just the community, very quickly the fellowship can become a very isolated and lonely journey. Right now you all have had collaborative groups that have stuck together. The school in your cities will probably look a little different. It'll be a very lonely journey at times, and so in those moments I would encourage you and urge you to reach out to this community, to reach out to all of the other people out there. There are 8 cohorts of fellows who've been through this, who have a shared experience. And we're all the same. Right now it's fellow alum, it's all artificial staff. We're all trying to do something together. So just keep that at the back of your mind. It's something that's very easily forgotten when you get into that passion, as Gaurav was talking about. So know that there is a community of people around you who've got your back. Okay, thank you everyone. You can go fill your bellies now that your minds and hearts are ready. All the best.